Hello, welcome to the Rooted Souls podcast. My name is Becca Spear and I will be your hostess. Here I am offering you talks on spirituality and self-development that bring you back down to earth. Bridging the gap between ethereal ideas and mindful realism. These talks illuminate the magic in the mundane and facilitate discernment in the far out for a life rooted in wisdom. This podcast is for conscious seekers who are just opening up to spirituality and personal growth, or those of you who've been on that journey for a while and you're realizing that things just are not what they seemed at first, or for those who are anywhere in between. I am so glad you're here. I invite you to either take a walk or sit down and relax with something nice and warm to drink, and just let this wash over you. Take what resonates, leave the rest, and just know that this is my gift to you. I hope that it serves you. I am so glad you're here, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Today's episode is called Creativity as a Catalyst for Our Individual and Collective Healing. Today, my guest is Laura Smith. She is an expressive arts therapist and community art educator working with schools, communities, and organizations to nurture individual and collective growth and healing through creativity. She's been designing and facilitating creative processes for the past 14 years throughout the US, its southern border, Central and South America, East Africa, and Asia. Her work uses a myriad of expressive resources, including community murals, peacemaking circles, visual art experientials, spontaneous play, and rhythm to promote healing, dialogue, and transformation. She currently lives in Medellin, Colombia, with a Fulbright Fellowship, where she works as a mural artist, partnering with different artist collectives and universities on the ground. Laura is part of a global street art movement called Girls to the Front, which allows women and girls and folks with diverse genders to create new narratives about themselves in the public space using public art as a vehicle. Laura is possibly my oldest friend. We've known each other for 22 years now. And I know, we were actually put together as roommates at an overnight summer art program in high school. Meeting Laura, I just remember I lit up. I couldn't believe how cool she was. And to this day, I still admire her and feel like she is the cool kid. Our friendship has waxed and waned over the years as we have lived in different parts of the country and the world. And interestingly enough, we both ended up in the mental health space professionally, although we started as child artists. Laura, I'm so stoked to have you here today, and I can't wait to dig into this topic.
It's such a treat to be here and to see this special podcast come to life and to be part of some of these initial episodes, and just fun to always sit down and have spontaneous conversations. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
Me too. And, you know, right before I launched the podcast, you showed me a piece of art that you had already been working on that inspired kind of the vision for what the essence of this podcast is, and maybe somewhere we can show people that painting. But you know, the topic with you always comes back to art, right? That was our common thread, that was our bond, and it's the conversation that often comes up here. And I can't help but thinking about how our friendship is a piece of art, and when I'm thinking about the theme of art, how our lives are as well. But what I love so much about our friendship, and I actually really cherished with a lot of women, is coming back to each other when the time is right, and that there's that strong bond to rely on, but it doesn't necessarily need consistency to maintain its richness. And, you know, we've had lots of conversations about how our meandering paths of healing is actually what creates such depth in our work with our clients. So I'd love to talk about that with you.
That sounds great. I love that. I just wrote that down, coming back to each other when the time is right. I think that happens in so many beautiful spaces in our lives. And that's part of trusting the timing of our lives as well.
So you've been working with art as a modality in your therapeutic process and in your personal life. I was a child artist. I worked with glass blowing and ceramics and some metal work through my 20s, but I'm an art school dropout. I only put in 1 year of art school and decided it wasn't for me. Ended up going towards the earth sciences, sustainability, and then back to health, holistic healing, and spirituality. So here I am as a life coach. But I love looking at the murals you create, the art you create. It's so intentional. And the kind of art I love is kind of just like putting together these materials and seeing what happens. And that's why I love gardening. It's why I love ceramics and glass blowing, because the mistakes look great too. And I was joking with Laura earlier that this podcast is so Becca. It's just pressing play and seeing what happens. That expression is an art, that our lives are art. And I think there's a lot to, that metaphor. But you just have so much wisdom when it comes to self-expression through the arts. And I'm so curious what you have to reflect on today.
Yeah, you just brought me back to summer camp as an adolescent. And that is a pretty unique and special thing. And also just thinking about like adolescence in our lives, and wow, what a moment in our lives where kind of anything is possible, but where we also have this incredible maybe privilege of naivety in thinking also that our lives are limitless. I guess that makes me kind of think about the role of the arts when I was that age, and at that moment where we met, which was this really beautiful summer camp, like you mentioned, out in Western Massachusetts in the rolling hills out there, with all sorts of really special ceramic studios and glass blowing studios. And I think it was maybe a year or two before we met that I really kind of started to think about, like, maybe think more consciously about the role that the arts and creativity had in my life. I think since from a young age, I was always a creator, a builder, a like think outside the lines kind of person or kid. But when I was in high school, it was kind of like a weird time where identity did not fully match up. And I was kind of like, who am I? And all the things that were happening in my world and in my life kind of caused me to feel like a little bit of a rebel, and like, no, I don't want to fit into these paradigms that are built for me. I want to be somebody else. I want to do something else. And I even at that point in my life was like, I don't think I want to finish high school, which was a really wild thing that I bumped up against some serious edges with. But it was actually a ceramic studio in my high school in Massachusetts that made me realize, oh, I have a place, I have people who believe in me, and I have this really cool gift of creativity that allows me to have control over something, that allows me to express things. And I think it was when I found that ceramic studio that I realized, okay, like, I don't ever want to stop creating. I don't ever want to stop making art, because this is something really special. And essentially, I would say like that moment, like that aha moment, was a moment where a lot changed for me. And I realized, oh, why would I drop out of high school? Because I have all of these opportunities. Like, if I go after these things that I love and that make me feel really good, and that I can connect with other people with, right? Like, I want to do something with that for my life. And that was a pivotal moment, maybe the year even before you and I met, or a year or two right before we met, that allowed me to really start thinking, okay, this is a step. I'm going to take a step in this direction. And it has gotten me to so many different places in the world and in my life. And the path has never, ever, ever been linear for me or for our friendship. And it certainly is not, well, I don't know anyone in the field of the arts and creativity who has walked a linear path, but that's the gift, right? It's like walking in spirals, and the twists and turns and the beautiful vistas that we have the privilege of seeing as we carve our way.
It's so neat to hear you mention not having wanted to finish high school. We've never had that conversation. I was a very challenged student in high school, and not because of a low intellect, but I was not interested in doing what I was told or sitting still or learning anything that I wasn't interested in. And glass blowing and ceramics was my safe place. It was where I actually felt like I could be me. And I actually was talking to my parents about dropping out junior year. And my dad kind of sat me down and he said, you know, if you want to blow glass, you can go to college for that. And it was that got me to just graduate with barely a GPA that could get me through. But it wasn't until art school and studying classes I could choose where I took art history and anthropology and sculpture, and finally did actually dabble in drawing and painting because I had to as part of the curriculum, that I got straight A's. And all my whole paradigm of I'm a bad student flipped over. Eventually I transferred to UMass Amherst and finished my bachelor's degree, but I was on the honor roll every term. And I had this narrative and identity as a bad student with learning disabilities. And when I left art school, I remember my essay to get into UMass was about how glass blowing taught me how to function with quote unquote ADD. I thought I wasn't somebody who could focus, but glass blowing taught me to focus, because if you look away, you get burned. And I was so interested in it that I had the focus to pay attention. So I wrote my whole essay on that glass blowing taught me how to focus. And it's interesting because we've never chatted about our resistance to the education structure or to graduate. But it was so fun. Nobody can see you, but I see these palettes behind you. And just every time we talk or I visit you or we come together, you've got some sort of art supply, either surrounding you or like in your pocket. And there is this piece of art that there's this essence of art that is always an invitation to be playful and to be present. And, you know, when I think of you, I just think of you as playful and present, which is why I loved your bio, because you mentioned the peacemaking circles, but also the spontaneous play and rhythm to promote dialogue and transformation. And so I can tell that you want to respond to what I said, and I want to give you space to do that. But after you do respond, I'd love to hear more about the role in community and your work with the murals in Columbia, and just the kind of transformation in the community that offers, but also how it's inviting other people to step into their path of healing.
I'm going to take some notes over here because
please do.
It just
you're using a colored pencil too.
No, I'm using this lovely, very linear pencil that helps me think and erase and start over again whenever I need to.
Love it.
I think, you know, so much of what you just said, Becca, I think you could see me here, like sitting on the edge of my seat, like, it's amazing to me too, that we've been friends for over 20 years and we never found that point of commonality in our learning. And it just, I think it makes me want to say thank you to all of the educators and all of the people who facilitate creative spaces for young people or for anybody who really needs those spaces, because those are those people in those spaces that I think actually really do have the potential to shift the course of people's lives. And for you, it was, you know, finding glass blowing that allowed you to find the metaphor that you needed to engage with learning. And for me at the time, it was ceramics and working with clay. But had those spaces and those people not come across our paths, you know, our lives would be really different. And for me personally, I think realizing the importance of having the arts and creativity as a way of engaging with the world around us has also informed from that early age where things go. And then also, you know, that where I am now with communities and inviting folks to engage with that as well. So maybe I'll back up a little bit and tell you how I got to what I'm doing now, because I'm 38 years old and it took me almost 40 of my years of my life to move to Medellin and do this work. And I've been really interested in it for several years, but I started also in UMass. I went to UMass Dartmouth, and I was on their Pathways program, which was a program at the time for people with low GPAs who did not engage with traditional learning, to actually get through the program by proving you could actually do the work. So I'm like over here like, wow, this is amazing, because I think we have maybe more in common than we even realized before we started.
I had no idea.
This call. Yeah. And same thing, I ended up being like, oh, this is what I like to learn about. This was fascinating to me. And so I went to UMass because the dots that I connected when I was in that early stage of discovering that I love to learn was, I love creating, I love making art, and I loved being with kids. I loved working with kids, being with kids, taking care of kids. So I decided to go to UMass for art education. And thank goodness, because yeah, it's been a beautiful, beautiful journey since then. But when I was at UMass studying art education, I took a semester off to travel a bit. I had to take a semester off before doing my student teaching, and it ended me up in Latin America. It landed me in El Salvador, in Central America at the time, because I was really interested in starting to learn another language. I was working with kids in the New Bedford Public Schools at the time, as a kind of starting out my student teaching, and realized, I think having another language would be really important. And I started my life with two languages as well. I was born in Switzerland, and if French was not my first language, French and English developed pretty much at the same time in utero. So traveling to Central America when I was just a young and really optimistic, idealistic college kid, it allowed me both to engage with the world in new ways and learn about myself, both as a white woman in foreign contexts and also as a learner. Like, I remember a moment where I was standing in front of a mirror before I traveled down to Central America by myself and pretending I could speak Spanish. Like, I was like speaking gibberish to myself, and I was like, wouldn't it be so cool if like I actually came home and I learned another language? And there were moments on that trip where I was like, oh, I think I'm like learning another language and I'm becoming fluent. And I'm now 15 years into that journey, but it's a really special thing that happens in that personal growth and learning process, where you can imagine something, right? And then you can make it a reality. And I think that's something that is so special about what I continue to do now as an artist. Is I like to bring people together to kind of like imagine the world we want to live in, and then create art as a platform to really paint the world we want to live in. And so I guess I don't need to go all the way down memory lane, but those 3 months that I traveled around Central America by myself ended me up graduating and thinking, I don't think I actually want to teach in public schools. I want the freedom to work with communities and create with other people. And I applied for a program at the time that was called ArtCore. It's now called the Creative Action Institute, that was hosting artists within Central America to partner with nonprofits and bring creativity to the work that those nonprofits were doing. And I worked with an incredible organization in El Salvador for 3 years called Fundamer, that works with communities around El Salvador in education and development. And they work with women and youth. They have an incredibly diverse range of projects, but one of the things that, it took me 3 years working with them to get to was that really for the folks at the organization to start taking advantage of creativity in the arts, like I needed to be able to offer those spaces where they could really tap into their own creativity. So we did a really lovely process called, we called it metodologías creativas, which is like creative methodologies. And that has stayed with me, the word methodologies, and how we create spaces and invite communities and people into creating together. So the long story of how I got there is, I guess, here to Medellin is in those years working in El Salvador, we were making art together. And as we started making art together, didn't matter who it was. It could be a group of youth, it could be a women's group, it could have been, I set up on a at a table on a corner in the local community where I was living. But as soon as we started making art together, we started talking, we started having conversations, right? And sometimes they were about the art that we were creating, and sometimes they had absolutely nothing to do with the art we were creating. But if you think about, El Salvador is a country that experienced a 12-year civil war. It continues to be an incredibly violent place. There's a gang war that has been going on since during their civil war, which ended, well, there was peace accords signed in 1991. But there is just so much that people hold in the history of that country. And once you start talking, right, and creating together, a lot of those pieces start to come out. Those things that people are experiencing, as well as the incredible capacity to heal, to rebuild, and to paint the world that we want to live in, basically the way that I was talking about it before. And, I think that was one of those moments on my professional track where I said, holy crap, this is like so beautiful and powerful. And people are having conversations and they're engaging with their own healing and their resilience and their stories. And yet I feel, as a facilitator, incredibly privileged, but also responsible. Like, I need to understand how, if I'm going to hold space for people to get to this point, I also have a responsibility to make sure that that's a safe space for healing, right? And so I left El Salvador to go back and get trained as an expressive arts therapist, so that I could not only hold spaces for education and creative dialogue, but also have the tools that I needed to walk with people on their healing journey as well. So I went to Lesley University and got my master's in expressive arts therapy, ended up at some really beautiful nonprofits along the way, one of which is in Lynn, Massachusetts. It's called Raw Artworks. They are an incredible organization holding space for young people in the community, facilitating creative therapeutics processes through something called creative youth development, and offering young people a place to really feel like they belong, which, I think felt like such an important home for the work I wanted to do for so many reasons, especially from, our earlier conversations in this podcast about when you have a creative space where you feel like you can belong and you can build, a lot more becomes possible. So when I was at Raw, I was facilitating processes for these young folks, and I was also leading a young women's mural team called WAMX, and I led that for about 3 years. And just like, I get goosebumps when I think about this team of young people who are so committed to creating changes and positive growth in their community, and that their creativity is carrying them there and allowing them to do that. And it was one of those moments where in my career, I thought, this is something that I want to explore and I want to go deeper into. And I also, I want to just get better at it so that I can keep doing it. And so I wrote a Fulbright grant to do that work on a maybe in more of a full-time scale, so that I could go deeper into that. And I can talk a little bit about why Medellin and how I got here, and what it is that I'm doing here. But that's a lot to start with and to chew on too.
It is, and I would like to hear that. The first questions that kind of percolate up as I hear you speak is that, it's a little bit abstract to think about how art heals. We talked a little bit about how, as angsty teenagers that don't feel like they fit in, it gave us a place to be productive and to express and to have fun. But when I think about communities making murals, or, the kind of work that you're talking about, I hear you say that it's a place for people on different sides of communities to come together and to have a common effort. But what really goes on behind the scenes that creates the healing and the connection and whatever else that I'm not privy to that you are? I really want to understand, what is really happening with the work that you're doing. How is it facilitating personal growth, and how is it facilitating community growth?
Yeah, I think there's so many layers to it. I think about kind of the three pillars where I was working at Raw, and the three pillars of creative youth development framework, which is very much rooted in art therapy and expressive arts therapy, which are I am, I create, we connect, right? And that we know, based on research, the importance of connection as part of our resiliency, right? If you think about the pandemic and like all of the mental health challenges that arose due to isolation and not having the opportunities to connect with folks in the ways that we know are important to our well-being, it is just so fundamental that we are able to connect with other people, because through that we get back to that other pillar, which is I am, right? It defines our identity, our interaction with one another, both on the day-to-day, but especially in safe spaces and in something that I call brave spaces, right? It allows us to bump up against those, our growing edge, right? Those places where we're able to look at ourselves and reflect on who we are and decide what kind of work we need to do in the world and for ourselves to feel well, to feel healthy, to feel like we are, I guess, living our best lives, but on the basic day-to-day, like being able to wake up in the morning. I know for me, that was a hard enough thing throughout the pandemic, being like, I got to wake up and I got to go to work and I have to show up for people because I know that there is that connection and I know that we need each other right now. So I think those three pillars, I am, I connect, and we create, the we create piece is that place where we also get to create new imaginaries together, and we get to dream. And when I think about the healing part of that, I do feel like imagination and creativity allows us kind of like a language for healing. It's almost like, I don't know, when you think about if somebody has experienced something or something challenging, they faced adversity, sometimes we feel a certain thing and we don't know how to explain that. And therefore it just becomes a feeling or a mush or a barrier that we don't know how to navigate with it. But as soon as we have the language to describe that, it also gives us a power over our own process. Like, it makes me think about, there's a book in the mental health field, the DSM, right, which is the Diagnostic Statistic Manual. And I was like, oh man, I'm never going to use that when I'm like doing clinical work. And then it's like, oh my God, to have an actual diagnosis, if that is something that somebody is working with, to be able to speak that language and to be able to use that language and to be able to say, this is why I feel this way, or this is why I communicate this way, or I learn this way, gives us more choices, right? It gives us the opportunity to interact with language and our imagination for what we want to build, what we want to do in different ways. So I think about the I am, I create, we connect, and also like how important language is for our own identity and how we relate to the world. And then also that piece of creativity and imagination as a context for really making sense of our purpose, our experience here in the world.
So the people getting involved in these projects, are they people from art schools? Are they from youth programs? I don't know about these projects if it weren't for you. So my guess is most of the listeners don't either. Is it something that anybody can get involved with? Who's doing this stuff?
So maybe I'll start by telling you a little bit about the Girls to the Front movement. So in 2017, the beginning of that year, I kind of had this epiphany. I was like, where are like the women in my life? I grew up with 4 brothers and really needed a circle of like powerful women. I love men, and I also really connect with folks of diverse genders. And yet it was that moment where I was like, I feel like I need my circle of women artists. And it was that same year in 2017 that I met by really chance encounter Pirañas Crew, which is a women's collective of muralists and graffiti artists from Medellin. And they had just recently founded a global platform called Girls to the Front, which is about getting women, girls, and folks of diverse genders kind of to the forefront of public art, and exploring these spaces for for engaging in community dialogues. So let's see, your question was about how can people get involved or how can they learn more? Is that right? Or who's showing up to the work?
All of that. You nailed it.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I'll start with sharing a little bit about Pirañas is a collective of women graffiti artists and muralists, like I said, and their movement to start Girls to the Front really started in 2017, the same year I met them, because in Medellin, between January and March of that year, there had been 43 femicides. For folks who are not familiar with that term, femicide, a femicide is when a woman is killed on the basis of her gender, a woman or a girl is killed on the basis of her gender. And, the UN has different definitions of that. Some of them are specifically having to do with women being killed in areas of armed conflict. It could be due to being in sex work. It could be a consequence of female genital mutilation. And it also could be within interpartner domestic violence, right? So when this kind of alarming statistic became apparent in Medellin in 2017, Piraña's crew, who was already a formed crew of women artists, said, what our response oftentimes is to this and to these scary situations, right, is to shrink back and to say, nope, I'm not going out into the streets, I'm not engaging with people. But they said, no, we can't do that. Like our power is in our art and our creativity. And what we're going to do instead is we are going to arm up a global movement of women and girls who are actually going to be our cardumen. Our cardumen is like a shoal of fish, right? We swim together so that we're stronger. And so they built the Girls to the Front platform as a space to bring attention to the femicides that were happening in Medellin, but also to address gender-based issues that were happening around the world through the use of public art. So Girls to the Front is definitely one of those platforms that anybody can be involved in. And Pirañas were a specific crew of interdisciplinary artists. We're human rights workers. We are psychologists. We have educators on our team. And we're facilitating spaces that really do exactly what I'm talking about, opening spaces for dialogue with communities as they pertain to gender issues, sexuality, sexual reproductive rights, and also specifically here in Colombia, the transitional peace process. And in 2016 here, the peace accords were signed. And so Colombia is currently in a transitional peace process where those spaces for dialogue and healing and truth telling become ever more important.
Wow, such powerful work and such underground work, at least for the communities I'm involved with. So I'm so grateful to you bringing a voice to this. And so grateful for your wisdom and your training and the heart that is Laura, that is brought you here. It's just, I talk to people from all walks of mental health work. And, I recently had a friend on who's a music therapist, but you're doing global work and it's so inspiring and it's so unique. And I'm just so grateful that you're with us today talking about it. There's a theme right now that I've been exploring about white privilege and individualism that I see dominant in the New Age spiritual space and coaching space. And here you are, a white woman working in a foreign context. How do you navigate that and what comes up for you?
Oh man, Becca, that is such an important question to be asking. And I think it's something that constantly comes up in the work that I do, whether it's here in a foreign context or I'm working as a white woman, where I was working previously. It was an incredibly diverse context, even in Massachusetts. So just the importance of being aware of skin color, power, privilege, and the impact that has in the spaces and the context that we're in. That's an important starting point. But I was asked a question recently when presenting at in a class, an expressive therapies class, that was very similar, right? How do I navigate being a white woman in a foreign context? Medellin it's a pretty metropolitan city. I live in an apartment building. For the most part, I feel safe where I live. And I have that incredible privilege here, which is something that not everybody who lives in the city or the peripheral parts of the city have access to. But it makes me think about, like that US narrative over the years, specifically in Latin America. We have a complex history with Latin America as folks from North America, from the United States. And a lot of our involvement in Latin America has been through supporting military and warfare. There's a school in Fort Bennings, Georgia, called the School of the Americas, where we actually train folks to torture people. And that could be shocking to some of your listeners. That school has been protested for many years. It was not actually shut down. They changed the name of it. But the US has backed a lot of very deadly wars here in Latin America, both in El Salvador, where I was for 3 years, and also here in Colombia. And so that question about my role as somebody, not just a white cis woman, but somebody who is from a country that represents, funding some pretty violent histories, I think is something really important for me to be asking myself. So I think for me, it comes in maybe the role that I feel is important in not necessarily rewriting these narratives, because I am one person, right? But offering spaces for intercultural exchange that amplify these narratives and open them to new things. As a facilitator who's really interested in creating spaces for dialogue with others, one, I'm not just facilitating those by myself. I am co-facilitating with folks from here. But the goal of those spaces, it's not about me, right? It's not about me or what my vision is. It's really about how do we create safe and brave spaces for people to engage within their own healing narratives and their own creativity. And so, I think there's a word here I've heard it a lot in El Salvador, and I've heard it here in Colombia as well, which is in Spanish, it's asistencialismo. People come and they give handouts, right? As this kind of this narrative or this dynamic. And I cannot ethically allow myself to do that. But I think that the beauty of sharing the arts, right, is it's sharing a different kind of wealth. It's supporting people to have access to something that is already within them. It's this access to our own creativity. It's this connection to our own creativity. And so when I hold spaces and I have this incredible honor and privilege of being able to be in a foreign context and connecting with people who I am learning so much from, I think about all that I learned when I was facilitating those arts and methodology workshops in El Salvador. Those are very much co-constructed spaces. Those were spaces where I had the privilege of learning about popular education methodology, which is an incredibly important methodology that guides a lot of the liberation movements throughout Latin America. And those are tools that have stayed with me. And I am just sharing what I have learned from others to offer spaces for learning and growth and healing. And I will say, I've had my own process. I've had my own process along the way that has been very much tied to the personal and the collective. And when I tell you that in 2017, I kind of made that wish for having more women in my life to co-create with, and along came Pirañas and Girls to the Front, like being in this collective has been something that has allowed me and the other artists space for our own healing. So much of what we talk about, as I mentioned before, is about reproductive rights, our sexuality, what it feels like to be a woman in public space and feel like we can actually claim those spaces and take up those spaces. For me, that happens here in Colombia. But when I go back to the States, I have such a different awareness about my sensuality, the way that I allow people to interact with me in a public space. And the things, so many of those things are things that I've learned with working with Pirañas and also with Girls to the Front, and reclaiming that part of my own healing process that, I think no matter where you are in the world, we've been handed narratives, or we have inherited narratives about what it means to be a woman in this world, a girl in this world, someone with a diverse gender. I will speak in I statements, but I have certainly been able to engage with those things that have been handed down to me in very different ways because of the things that I have learned with others.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And now that we've focused on the collective, as you started to touch in on your own personal experience, how do we come back to the self in this conversation? For those of us who are just getting ready to bring art into our personal practice, what would you recommend as some options for starting points?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have some resources and practices that over the years have really supported doing this work that I'd love to share with your listeners. And I think also just even connecting and naming that for me, creativity is spirituality, and that's very personal, but it's something that throughout my life has been a touchstone of seeing myself in the mirror, reflecting on myself, and also putting one brick on top of the other to build something that I want to offer to the world, but that I also see as kind of turning back towards that creative gift. So I guess I'll share some of the things that have been important as practices. When I was first living in El Salvador, it found its way to me. Many of your listeners may or may not have heard of the book, The Artist's Way. It's a 12-week process for deeper spiritual creativity, something along those lines. I'm sorry, Julia Cameron, that I am not saying the title of your book right. But it actually was a really important thing for me to do because it offered me some practices for staying in touch with myself and my own creativity. And a few of those practices I continue to do to this day. One of those is morning pages. Morning pages is basically you wake up in the morning, you open up a notebook. I have my morning pages book right here. You can hear my pages. And you just free flow write, right? You write 3 pages of whatever comes to your mind. You put that on the page and then you go on with your day. And the idea is just like kind of getting that mind chatter onto the page so that you can connect with those deeper subcurrents of your creativity, of your spirituality, of your own intuition throughout the day as you're making choices and moving about your day. So that is one of the practices that I started with her book, The Artist's Way, and I continue to hold. Another one is artist dates. I love that Julia Cameron shared with me the artist date. The artist date is something that, man, I'm ready for an artist date right now. It's where you take yourself out on a date. You say, okay, I'm going on a date with my inner child, and whatever they want to do, we're going to do it. So, I mean, with what's within our reach, right? Like when and I still don't have access to, I mean, I make $800 a month through my Fulbright grant, so I'm not making a ton of money, but the idea is like, you can go to a toy shop and buy yourself stickers, or you can climb a mountain and take pictures of all the beautiful landscapes that you see. It's anything that feels like it would be a starting place for inspiration, or that I like to think of it as like feeds your creative child, right? Your creative inner child. Those are some practices from her book. So artist dates and morning pages are wonderful practices, highly recommend. I also just read a really beautiful book. This might be less about practices, but even just learning a little bit more about the individual and collective process and creativity. There is a Colombian theater artist and psychologist. His name is Hector Aristizabal, and he wrote the book, The Blessing Next to the Wound. And it really is about how our own wounds and our own kind of psyches and our experiences can also help us find our ways back to healing. And, you know, I think something really poignant that he said in his book was that the ways that he has been hurt in his life have also have given him the desire to develop the tools to share with other people. And I think, when I'm going to share just a quote from him that has kind of guided me as an expressive arts therapist, and also that I am thinking about a lot right now, which is, he said, inspired by a public health model, I realized that I want to see communities and not just individuals grow healthier. I feel like I continue to be influenced by this because I do feel like my own healing is bound up with that of the collective. And it is constantly an opportunity to turn back towards myself, and then turn back towards the world. And for me, it's that ebb and flow of me, you, me, you, me, you, us, right? That I guess maybe gives me the opportunity to have creative practice that does not exist in isolation. So I would say, do your morning pages, do some artist dates, read those amazing books, but then also find a friend to make art with, right? Create with somebody, ask each other a great question. It does not have to be anything fancy. Get some crayons or cardboard. I've been building sculptures out of cardboard, whatever it is. This could be a good place for us to end. I'll also share another quote that I've been loving these days, which is by Maxine Hong Kingston. And it says, in a time of destruction, create something, a poem, a parade, a community, a school, a vow, a moral principle, one peaceful moment. That's Maxine Hong Kingston. And I think, if our own creativity is a way of responding to the world, but also of turning back to ourselves, just make something, right? Make something, write something, allow that creative juju to take you to maybe another level of being present and of existence and of engaging with your reality.
I love that so much. And I so deeply relate to the quote about meeting the wound leads me to getting the healing, which then allows me to contribute to others with that journey, with that wisdom. And if I reflect back to your and my conversation months ago now about what our first episode could be together, we talked about how our own personal healing journey has crafted us into such leaders and such, wise mental health practitioners because of our challenges, because of the pain we've endured, because of the wounds that we've, chosen to heal. And that is what creates a rich resource for others. So it's not just about, focusing on the self for the self. It's focusing on the self to then be more of a voice and more of a resource for others. So self-care is also community care, and community care is also self-care. So I just love so much this conversation and your very different perspective. And thank you for traveling the world and bringing this back to us, what you've gleaned. And I am going to link in the description of the episode your Instagram so people can follow you if they're interested in seeing what you're up to in Colombia and wherever else you end up. And some of the organizations that you're working with, I'll link those as well, and those book recommendations. But I'm so grateful for your experience, for your friendship, and for your willingness to share your voice. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me and for opening this beautiful space of spontaneous creativity and dialogue. It's cool to see where it took us, and I've got seeds for where to go next. And
awesome.
I think I'm gonna go make something.
Oh, I think I'm feeling called too as well. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you next time.
Thank
so
you,
much
Becca.
love.
Take good care.
Bye-bye. Okay, thank you for listening and becoming part of this community. If you loved this episode, I invite you to subscribe, share with someone you think would appreciate it, or leave a review. This helps me to learn what resonates with you so I can deliver more of what you want and reach more people who can benefit from this content. If you want to reach me, please feel free to reach out on my website, www.beccaspiert.com. I would love to hear from you, get any feedback, and know what's on your mind. Until next time, take great care.